Welcome to another episode of my Wake Up Call. This is the podcast where I find out a little bit about my guests and then I save getting to know them much better for the podcast because you, our listeners, and our viewers, when these go up as videos, seem to want to know not just what my guests do and what they're about, but how they became that. And I have a surprise for my guest today. His name is Bill George, and he doesn't know that I've been a student of his evolution, and it dates back to when he gave a talk at Pepperdine University some years ago. And one of the things that he shared was a lot of his early failures in life, because he may not have used the word, but he said he came off as a know-it-all. He came off as someone who was technically skilled to do any of the jobs that he failed to land. And what he realized is that people need to feel you care about them. People need to, there's that saying that people have, that you've probably heard, that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Mm-hmm. And I've watched Bill in his evolution from an incredible left brain engineer into just this whole human being. And I'm really thrilled to have him on because we shared a mentor, a fellow named Warren Bennis, who, if you've listened into the podcast, you know that I refer to him because I miss the guy. And when I see how leadership is and what it's become, I miss him even more. And that's why I'm proud to have Bill on, because Bill basically took the baton from Warren, and Warren passed it on to him. And Bill is just, well, let me tell you about some of the more formal things, because you, my listeners, will say, who is this Bill George? So let me give you some of his background. He's the former chairman and chief executive officer of Medtronic. He joined Medtronic in 1989. As president and chief operating officer, he was their chief executive from 1991 to 2001 and board chair from 96 to 2002. He's currently a senior fellow at Harvard Business School, where he has taught leadership since 2004. He's the author of many admired and necessary books, including Discover Your True North and the Discover Your True North Field Book, Authentic Leadership, 7 Lessons for Leading in Crisis, Finding Your True North and True North Groups. He has a new book out called True North, the Emerging Leader Edition. And I'm especially tickled with that because he's mentoring his co-author. Or he'll probably say, Mark, you got it backwards. My co-author is mentoring me. I mean, it's the millennials leading things, and millennials just need a little kind of help because they really aren't going to put up with leaders who don't care about them. And he has a wonderful co-author, Zach Clayton, and they've formed an amazing relationship. And as I was reading the book and reading about their relationship, I missed Warren even more. Can I share a Warren story, and maybe you'll share one?
You bet. Please do.
I got a lot of Warren stories, but towards the end of his life, it was clear that his health was failing, and we'd get together for breakfast or lunch in Santa Monica or Venice, California, near his home. And towards the end, when I would meet with him, I'd be crying. I'd be having breakfast, and tears are running down my face. I don't break my stride. I just keep talking. I can't control the tears. And he sort of noticed it, but didn't comment on it. And one of the things that Warren, like many people who are thought leaders and gurus, one of the things they're a little sensitive to is they don't like people who are trying to use them. And everybody's trying to use the Warren Bennises of the world and the Bill Georges of the world because, they're hitting on them. And I was blessed to have 8 mentors, and I never asked any of them for anything because the gift of their time was more than enough. So there's one time when I'm crying and he's noticing it, and I said, Warren, uh, you've probably noticed I've been crying in our recent breakfast. And he said, yes, Mark. I said, I have a confession to make. I've been using you. And he arched his back. He said, what? But he knew me. He said, okay, Mark. Okay, Mark. Okay. What's the story? And then I looked at him and I said, there are some things in my life that I never thought would heal. Didn't have the closest relationship with my father. And I just never thought they'd heal. I worked around them and did the best to work my way around them. But you've healed them. And I'm crying from the healing.
Wow.
And then he pulled back, put his hand on his chin. You probably know that gesture. And he said, not a bad way to use me, Mark.
Wonderful.
Hear a Warren story with our audience because they know that I just love the guy.
Well, I first came across Warren when I was going to Medtronic, 1989. Now, I have to say, most of the books I was a voracious reader of leadership books, but most of them didn't speak to me. They weren't the kind of leader I was interested in. A lot of leaders that day, it was all about charisma and power, the white male with the big barrel chest, the image I'm talking about, and how you dominate people. And so I read Warren's book. And I can tell you, On Becoming a Leader in 1989, just as I was going to Medtronic. It was so first book I saw that really, yeah, this is the kind of leader I want to be. And thank you, Warren, for giving me that. So I've always considered Warren the father of leadership. I think Peter Drucker's the father of management. Warren's the father of leadership. And I would say today, Mark, we have millions of managers and not nearly enough real leaders. And I think that's a huge issue. That's why I'm writing. So towards the end of his life, Warren used to ask me to come out regularly to his classes at Southern Cal. Actually, first story was I was trying to decide what to do with my life. And I went to, after I left Medtronic, I left the company when I was 59. What am I going to do now? And I consider myself young, lots to do. I'd retired from Medtronic, but now retired from life. And so I went to Switzerland to try my hand at teaching, went to a couple institutions there. And then Kim Clark, the dean of Harvard Business School, asked me to come back and help him launch a new course on leadership and corporate accountability, which could be called an ethics course by any other name. And so Warren had been there, and I was excited he was there, and he was actually doing research there, but then he left and moved to USC. And he graciously offered me his apartment. So the first 4 months we stayed in Warren's apartment just off Memorial Drive. And it was wonderful. And so Penny was there with me that whole time, helping me get launched into teaching at Harvard Business School. But then towards the end of his life, he asked me to come out one last time to USC and make sure that I brought Penny. He always wanted Penny, my wife, to come. And he got the two of us up in his classroom. And it was interesting. He could barely talk in those days because we were like 2-3 months before the end of his life. It was the second to last class he ever taught. But the students were like spellbound, listening to God, And so we talked about a lot of things. Then we went out for dinner that night. So Penny asked him, Warren, what would you like to be on your tombstone? And he said, grateful friend. That's Warren. He wanted to be your friend. And he was grateful to you, Mark, for what you gave him. So it was a two-way street always in his mind. He had given me so many ideas, particularly when I was coming out. He helped me get launched with a new career. So you see, I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I left Medtronic. I knew I wanted to do something. I didn't want to go back and be CEO of some other company because I'd had a great run at Medtronic. And so I really, as I mentioned, I was trying to change leadership, and that's a pretty bold, arrogant thing to say. But I was very unhappy with all the focus on leadership and who's got the true quality, who's born as a leader. And I don't really believe leaders are born. I think you have to lead to become a good leader. And I think you have to lead with your heart. It was all about leading. Who's the smartest person in the room? Let's get, Jeff Skilling up there. He's the smartest guy around. We'll make him the great leader of the day, which he was in those days. Known as, he wasn't, but he was known as. And so I decided I wanted to write about a different form of leadership, authentic leadership. And that's Warren helped me get that book. He took it in the Warren Bennett series in 2003 and got me set up with Josie Bass, so no other publisher was interested in here, a young first-time author. And so Warren, my first 4 or 5 books were written as part of the Warren Bennett series, which I really appreciated. And he never edited a word, or nor did he write a word. But I sat in his living room in 2007 for 4 solid days. And he went over every idea in my new book, True North. And that was the book I'd interviewed 125 people for. And he gave me all kinds of great ideas to enable me to go deeper. An example would be the novelist John Barth, who I'd never heard of John Barth. He said, because I was writing about life stories, because we found in our research how important life stories were. No other academics bought into this, maybe one, but the rest of them did. So John Barth said, the story of your life is not your life, it is your story. I've never forgotten that. I teach it in the classroom. So it's how you frame your story that matters. You were mentioning, how do you frame your relationship with your father, Mark? How do I had struggled. I never had an intimate relationship with my father. I did with my mother. And so how do I now, he's been deceased for 30 years, how do I frame that relationship? Because it's important for my growth, he's long gone, but that I continue to see that in a different light, and so Warren had those kind of ways of just sharing things and helping me go deeper and thinking about what it meant to be an authentic leader and what it meant to discover your true north.
So can you talk a little bit about learning to lead from your heart? Because, it wasn't always that way, and your head is so analytically smart. You're a good problem solver, and especially share about how maybe you're trying to impart some of that to Zach, because a lot of millennials, they're really pedal to the metal, impatient. Let's move it forward. Let's get going. And I think they're missing out on something. They could be missing out on heart. And can you talk a little bit about that and your own journey to lead more from your heart, or as much from your heart as from your head?
Mark, it isn't just the millennials, it's the baby boomers, and frankly, it's mostly academics. That's soft. No, it's not soft. It's actually hard. I can tell you, I can go into any corporation in the world, get together 6 competent people, and we can put together a plan to transform the numbers. That's easy. You may think it's hard. It's not hard. You may get paid a lot of money to do it. It's not hard. We know what to do. You may not like doing it. You may not like laying off 5,000 people, but we know what to do. Leading with the heart is really hard because you're making yourself vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there. But first, you have to go out and develop your heart. What does that mean? You have to know who you are. And all my work in the Emerging Leader edition of True North is focused on starting out knowing who you are, because you can't go lead other people until you know who you are. And so that really gets into your life story and your crucibles at difficult times. And I've been told, don't talk about crucibles, only talk about them as good times. See, the formative things in our life is when all the pretense is stripped away, the titles, everything else, and you're standing there looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, who am I? What do I really want to do with my life? What do I believe? Am I an organization that shares my beliefs, my principles, my values? Is this a place where I can grow and flourish and I can find fulfillment through my work? If it's not, I'm going to leave. So actually the millennials, that's what's leading to the great resignation, because so many companies, like General Electric, we're just about making money. That's all we do here. Well, a lot of people say, I don't want to spend 40 years of my life making money for you and getting you bonuses. I actually want to grow as a person. So leadership has changed dramatically, and I'm thrilled to see it coming around to these ideas, because at first people almost made fun of what is authenticity. And, and that's all soft. No, it's hard, because it means to lead with the heart means to have passion for your work. It means to have compassion for the customers you serve. It means to have deep empathy for the employees you work with. Everyone goes through difficult times. You can't just say, suck it up. You have to recognize that people are going through tough times. And most of all, you have to have courage. And I found the big difference between managers and leaders is a lot of managers are very competent, but when it comes to the big decision, they lack courage. They won't take the big, it's, like Rudyard Kipling says, you roll the dice and you risk it all in a game of pitch and toss. Well, you're risking it all like Ken Frazier did when he walked out of the President Trump's council, when everything Merck does is controlled by the government. That's courage. That's moral courage. And that's who we need leaders today that have that. Well, you're not born with these things. Actually, my wife's a doctor in psychology. She shared an awful lot of things with me. But one thing, your IQ doesn't really change between the age of 10 and 60. But what does change, you can develop your emotional intelligence. But you have to do that through relationships with people. You can't just do it sitting in a lab. You have to gain self-awareness. You have to know who you are. You have to practice your values. You have to make mistakes. You have to realize that vulnerability is power. And that when you're willing to be vulnerable, that you have the power and you're willing to share with other people your mistakes and say, I made a mistake. I don't know. I'm not the smartest person in this room. I don't know the answer. Could you help me here? And my experience is that kind of leadership today is the millennials. The reason I wrote this book is that's what the millennials and younger leaders are insisting on. Until they know who you are, they're not going to follow you. And
so can you give an example of you're discovering yourself and you're developing yourself, something in each of those that surprised you? So in your journey to discover yourself, can you give an example of when I was willing to really dig deep and ask myself, who am I? What am I about? What is something that you discovered about yourself? And then what is something that you leaned into after you discover that and you said, I got to develop this part of myself? Can you give an example from each?
I am, but I've got to go back a little earlier in my story. I too didn't have an intimate relationship with my father. He was a consultant. He traveled 4 days a week and came back on Thursday nights and went to the office 27 miles away on Friday. And then Saturday he went to the golf course at 7:30. Sunday he felt he had to do it for business. Very close to my mother, intimately close to my mother. And so my father said when I was like 9 or 10, son, I feel like I failed. I thought he was a good consultant. He said, I never became a leader. I want you to become that leader. I want you to make up for my failures. Well, that's kind of a heavy trip for a little 9 or 10-year-old boy. And even named companies. He said, you could be head of this company in Atlanta, Georgia, I've held stock in since 1937. It's called Coca-Cola. Or there's another company in Cincinnati called Procter & Gamble. There's a new emerging computer company out in the East Coast called IBM. I actually had summer jobs with these people. They're all fabulous companies. But, I had this in the back of my mind. And so I'm going to school. I've never chosen to lead anything. I'm the kid that's trying too hard, but too hard to get ahead. And so I never got chosen to lead anything. Finally ran for president senior class, my senior in high school, lost by a margin of 2-1. So I went off to Georgia Tech 800 miles west, in part to get a fresh start, quote unquote, and took myself with me, ran for office 6 more times and lost all 6. And the best thing that happened to me was some seniors took me aside and said, Bill, no one's ever going to want to work with you, much less be led by you, because you're moving so fast to get ahead, you never take time for other people. And they were right. I hadn't realized leadership is about relationships. As you implying earlier, Mark, 2-way relationships, not 1-way, 2-way. And so I was fortunate to lead a lot of organizations. Well, then I still had in the back of my mind this subliminal idea. I could push my father away, but have this subliminal idea I'm going to be head of a major company. So I went to Litton Industries, realized that, frankly, I built the consumer microwave oven business for a decade. I loved it, but the corporation was corrupt. And when they wanted, they were manipulating the numbers. When they wanted me to come out there, I wasn't going to do it. So I went to Honeywell. Opportunity, this could be a great company. President Honeywell Europe loved it. Then a new CEO came in. I got thrown into all the tough turnarounds. One day I'm driving home and I was kind of falling into the same trap I'd fallen into in high school, kind of grabbing for that brass ring, trying to be the CEO, the title. And I was one of the 2 leading candidates, probably the leading candidate. And one day I'm driving home. I only have 10 minutes from work. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, and what I saw was a miserable person, me. Now, on the surface, my wife had a good job, two wonderful sons, lots of friends, doing well in his career. No, I was miserable because I was faking it to make it. What a horrible idea. Trying to wear couplings, which I don't wear, pretend to be the man, to say the right thing to the board. Honeywell's kind of company, you had to check your values at the door. You couldn't bring any feelings in, no passion, just be logical, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm very good at math and science, but that's not who I am, really at my core. And so I went home and told my wife about this, and she said, Bill, I've been trying to tell you this for a year. You refused to listen. She was right. So at that time, I reopened the door to go to Medtronic. I turned them down 3 times for jobs. Not often you get 4 times to get a shot at it. And so I remember walking into Medtronic and I said, this is a much smaller company. I'm not the big company my father wanted me to be at, 750 million. Honeywell was 7, 8 billion, 10 times the size, and my own business was 3 times, 4 times the size. But this is where I should be. This is we're restoring people to full life and health. This company has great values, and we can work together. These are great people. They may not be as sophisticated as Honeywell people, but they are great people, and we could build on that base. And it was the best decision I ever made in my life. But see, I think if I hadn't gone through those experiences, getting kind of being unhappy with myself. So what I learned is really all about leading with your heart, because that's what people at Medtronic did. And I had to learn how to do that. To ask your earlier question, I had to learn how to gain self-awareness, which sometimes I have a lot of blind spots. I had to learn how to surround myself with people who are smarter. I knew nothing about the medical business. I knew a lot about high tech, nothing about the medical business when I went to Medtronic. And I had a vice chairman next to me. I said, I don't want you to be a subordinate. I want you to be a partner. You may have to be, I have to make the final decision, but I'm always going to listen to you on your medical advice and frankly, on your personal advice. And so I got a CFO who was smarter than I was. So I tried to surround myself with people who knew more than I did so that I could continue to grow.
So let me ask you something, because you are talking to I'm a retired psychiatrist, but what do they say? You can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. So you said you were closer to your mom, and your dad had all these great aspirations for you. You can lead anything. What was missing between you and your dad?
Emotion, feelings. His father had never shown him. He couldn't. Even when my mother died, there were no feelings. My mother died when I was 24. And I remember that. I felt like he had died that same day. And he couldn't really share the impact that had on his life. He did go on to marry twice again, but it was like the soul was taken out of him when my mother died, because she was the guiding light, the spirit. And actually, she was a real leader in our family. She had led every organization she'd never been in, but we had this gender bias in those days. She stopped work when I was born. So women, they're people stay at home, raise a family. Maybe they work and volunteer, but the important people are the men who work in business and earn the upkeep. And so, and I realized just my mother was the leader that was really my role model for values. That's what mattered for who I was. She didn't care if I got A's or C's. She would say, son, you just be true to your values. That's all I care about. And so I take that with me today. It's like she's a little bird sitting on my shoulder. If I have to make a values-based decision, I'm thinking, what would my mother, what if I tell her what I'm going to do? What would she think? So, but my father was a wonderful person, but he just lacked that capacity to do that. Of course, that had hurt him in his career. So, so I had to develop those qualities rather than thinking, I'm going to do great at Georgia Tech and at Harvard and get the best grades and be the smartest guy. And I did go to work in the defense department under Robert McNamara and Cy Vance and Paul Nitze, some pretty extraordinary people. But they all thought alike. And they all marched us off the cliff into Vietnam together. So, but they were really people I learned from, but I learned there's a lot more to leadership than that. But the Medtronic experience really helped me grow as a person and really open up my heart and not feel like, hey, I got to get the numbers right all the time.
So, are you open to my sharing something with you that has helped me with my father, who's been gone since 1995? Are you open
I
to it?
would love it. Please do.
I collect quotes, and one of my favorite Warren quotes, he had so many, was boredom occurs when I fail to make the other person interesting.
Hmm.
Great quote. But the quote that has knocked all my other quotes off and I collect them, is from a woman who has an organization called Project Forgive. And she said, forgiveness is accepting the apology you will never receive.
Lovely. That is very moving.
And when she said that, I applied it to my father, who'd been dead for 20 years. And and he worked hard, and he always was worried about being able to support the family. And he was good with numbers, but he wasn't really all that good with a lot of other things. And so I've always been a tad sort of outside the box and creative. And when I would come up with something a little bit creative, he could be dismissive and say, what makes you think you know anything about anything? Very dismissive. And for years, I carried that around, but accepting the apology I'll never receive, is I imagine the dad inside, deeper underneath the insecure person. I imagine him saying, remember when I used to tell you what makes you think you know anything about anything? I was talking about myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm good with numbers, but there's a lot of other things I wasn't good with.
Yeah.
And they made me nervous, and I put them down. And what you've done with your life and the lives you've saved. I was a suicide prevention specialist, and none of my patients died for 30 by suicide. And
Wow.
he said,
Wow.
what you've done with your
Thank
life.
you. Interrupt you. Thank you. That's a very powerful statement. Very powerful.
And he just said, what you've done with your life, I don't deserve you as my son. I'm proud to know you, and I'm sorry. And I started crying, and I said, I'm sorry that I held this against you. I should have known better.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be that, an apology set us free. And it may be that the apology you never received from your dad was I pushed you to get ahead because I never got ahead. I saw you as being much more of a leader than me, and I pushed you to do that, and I pushed you to do that. And it was at the expense of our being close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I apologize
Give
because
me a chill to hear you say that. Thank you.
yeah,
I'm having therapy session right now.
I do that on these. That's why this podcast seems to be doing well. And he's saying, we both missed out, and I especially missed out. And I'm proud that you developed the things that I didn't develop, so that you can be closer to the people you love that I couldn't be.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I often say, back to that John Barth quote, the story of your life is not your life, it's your story. I've had to reframe, and I encourage people in the classroom to do the same thing, but I've had to reframe the image of my father. My father sacrificed for me. He gave me everything he had. The fact he didn't have all the emotional depth my mother had, okay, fine. He never resented that, but he gave me everything he had. He really did. And he wanted me to become that person he never became. And I hope he's proud of me now, looking down from heaven. He died in 93, so a couple of years before your father died. And I hope, he is. That's kind of the way I look at it. So
maybe, when I went through the exercise, I apologized to my dad, and that freed me. And maybe you can say, Dad, I want to apologize to you because you gave me everything you had. There have been times when I thought it was harder to come from my heart because we weren't close, but you sacrificed everything for me.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for that. And you gave me the best of what you had. And to the extent that I sometimes bring up I wasn't close to you, you deserve better for me.
Beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the shrink stuff. Okay, forget the shrink stuff. Pretend we're at Honeywell. Pretend they'll say, "Get away from that, Mark. Stop this heart stuff. Let's get back on track with True North for emerging leaders."
Good. Okay, where do you want to go? Got lots of ideas, so you tell me.
So, are there times with Zach that you see in him these headstrong millennials, and uh, and it's important, uh, as you say, they want to feel cared about, uh, but a lot of them are in such a rush. You know, they they don't know how to care because everything is rapid, rapid, rapid. I remember I had dinner with Warren and Norman Lear. That was a good dinner, the three of us. And I asked Norman Lear and Warren, I said, what do you think is the greatest danger for the future? And they looked at each other and they looked at me and they said the same word. They said expediency.
Mm-hmm.
They said, when you rush, you miss important things.
Yeah.
And so can you fill us in on your relationship with Zach? Because it sounds like this is a book in where you're sharing the baton with him. He's an emerging leader. You have these iconic leaders in the book, Indra Nooyi, Satya Nadella, but you also, each chapter, and if you're listening in, it's and I just put up a review at Amazon. It's one of those rare books where didactics seamlessly crosses over into stories, and then stories back into didactic. So just when your mind is going to wander because it's too didactic, there's a wonderfully relevant story. And what I like is the stories are the right length, because I've seen some books where the story goes on too long and it's perfectly choreographed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So talk
Well,
about.
we tried to do that. So the stories, I think one of the things I've tried to do in my writing is most academics write in the third person, like this person from Massachusetts did this. And, I think people want to hear from the leaders themselves. So I don't screen that. I just put in what is the most relevant thing they tell me. I might have interviewed them for 75 minutes and I get a transcript and then pull out, but their exact quotes and then send them back to Paul Pullman. Are you willing to have us put this in? Is this okay? Ursula Byrne, can we put these things in? Of course, without exception, they said, yes, it's amazing. They tell us some very, very intimate things that I never would have guessed they would have let us put in. Beth Ford is the first openly gay CEO. She's quite a private woman. She runs Land O'Lakes. It's owned by farmers and retail people that sell to farmers in Iowa and southern Minnesota and all over. And so she said, when I go out to see them, I don't show up as the female CEO. I don't show up as a gay CEO. I'm the CEO. And by the way, Mark, if you have a problem with that, that's your problem. Just a beautiful statement saying, and then she tells about some big farmer who was standing there with tears in his eyes, wants to meet her. And he said, thank you so much. My son is gay. And, this transformed him. And that's why he has tears in his eyes, because he probably had some questions about that. And then he saw this happen in his own son. But Beth tells those stories, but everyone does. And it's just beautiful to see. And Zach did tell his story. He told it in the book. Is actually harder on himself than he thought he should have been. I have a higher opinion, about struggles he had, but we all, because it's kind of like every person's story. Everyone has to go through that growth that starts out. He was the superstar in North Carolina, superstar at Harvard Business School. He could do everything right. Brilliant guy. He is brilliant, a lot smarter than I am. But so we got to know each other in 2009 because he taught me about social media. I didn't know anything. I was clueless, and he taught me about how to use it. And we started writing together, and it was kind of a nice playoff against each other. But and I remember one time he was making a big mistake. I tried to counsel him out of it. It took him better part of a year to realize it. He sold a third of his company to a company in New Jersey. They made him a senior vice president. He's a North Carolina guy, very loyal. And so he went up there, and it lasted, like I say, about 9 months, because he tells the story in the book. And then he got married. He's got 4 kids now, and it's been transformative for him. And it's wonderful to see the growth, and his business is just taken off like a rocket ship. So anything to do with that I did, but it's good to have that kind of relationship. But I think most young leaders, I'll give you another one. First story in the book, Kabir Bardey, son of an Indian immigrants. The fastest growing company in the Inc. 5000, company called OneTrust that he founded, grew 48,000% in 3 years. Number one growing company. He was killing himself. He was trying to do it all himself. And he actually had a severe health problem. And a mutual friend called and said, because I've been on the board of Mayo, can you help me get in the Mayo Clinic? I said, sure. I never even met him. I met him way long after that. He was literally dying of stress. And I know that as a psychiatrist, you may understand that. Most of us don't. Could you really die of stress? Could you kill yourself of stress? Yes. He was so driven that he would go on Thanksgiving Day, he would go to London because the Brits don't celebrate so that he could work. And that's when he almost died of, and they didn't know what it was. They couldn't diagnose because it was stress. And I think the medical community, by the way, is not very good at dealing with stress, honestly, to be blunt about it. I think they really don't understand the impact of stress on the human body. And it's probably the #1 killer if we'd look at that, and obesity, if we'd look at it that way. But, suicide is really that you were talking about, that's stress related, and as are a lot of negative things. Anyway, so I've had a great relationship with Zach, and we play off against each other, and that's been really, really fun. Okay, we had a big debate about the book is quite critical of Mark Zuckerberg of leading without his true north, and Zach was very uncomfortable with that. It wasn't that he was uncritical; it was that he was afraid half the world's younger people were all going to hate us for saying that. So we did a little crowdsourcing, and of course, all the people, we had 300 people in the crowdsource, and they all said no, they lost total confidence in Mark. So then we went ahead and wrote up the story. And, it's a tough story, but I think that Kabir Bardey, who proved his story, these things people, I think, have to see that you too can lose your way. And here's how you can do it. So that's why we try to tell these stories, to try to help people, not to rip on people, but to learn from each of the stories that's relevant.
So, has Zach ever told you he loved you?
No, I don't know that he would, but
No, I want to share something with you because look, I'm older than you.
You are?
I am, yeah. I'm
I
74.
don't think so. Go ahead.
And so I had 8 mentors. They all died.
Mm-hmm.
The last one was Larry King.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I went to breakfast with him for 2 years before pandemic, and before him was Warren.
Uh-huh.
And I'll just share this with you. As I got to know Larry, he was on my podcast twice. At the breakfast group, I would often listen intently because I'm a psychiatrist and they're all bantering. And he would look at me, and he had a nickname for me, Dr. Morose. And I said, look, I don't want to bring everyone down. He said, no. We need Dr. Morose because we banter, we get off on things. We need Dr. Morose. So towards the end of his life, I was helping him out, and I would I'd go over there and I'd hypnotize him so he would eat.
Oh, wow.
And the last time I saw him, and he was a gruff but big-hearted guy from Brooklyn. And I remember the last time I saw him, I finished, kind of hypnotizing him. He was lying there in his room. And I looked at him and I had this feeling I'd never see him again.
Mm.
And I said, Larry, what? One last thing. What? I said, I love you, Larry.
Wow.
And he paused. He said, I love you, Morose. I'm just sharing it. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, you could say to Zach, now you may be embarrassed but I would bet everything that he loves you as much as he respects you. And don't be like your father. Add it to the conversation.
Thank you. Good advice.
Really, really.
And I think we males are kind of culturated early in our life. Maybe I shouldn't quite do that, put myself out there and say, I love you. And certainly my father had trouble with that.
Well,
and so you're right. You're right. You've got a very good. I'm saying it much more to people now.
I'll share a lesson with you. I did house calls to dying patients to help them make peace with their lives. And some of them were very powerful. And I remember one, I can't mention who he was, but he was beloved by the world, had multiple marriages. And they liked that I could just be a straight shooter because everybody else would be intimidated. And I remember I met with him and I said, you look terrible. And I don't think it's because you're dying. You've been dying as long as I know you. What's going on?
Wow.
And he looked at me and he said, I don't think I've ever done anything important. And I said, wow. Really? You got a hospital named after you. You made thousands of jobs. You're beloved. And he looked at me and he smiled. He said, "Don't con a con man, especially when he's dying." He said, "I've
Did
got
he
all."
really? What a statement.
He said, "I've got all the love that money can buy." And then he looked at me and he said, "Everything I thought was important is unimportant.
Right.
Everything I thought was unimportant is important, and I've run out of time to fix it."
Yeah.
So, look, don't be your father. I'm telling you, go to Zion.
I'll take your advice. Thank you. And I'll go do that. We were just together in New York for the book launch. But let me go back to what you just said. Okay. So this is one of the reasons I wrote the book. Why do people have to wait till they're on their deathbed? Why do they have to wait till they're my age to realize this is really important? So I'm trying to help people realize when they're 25 or 30 or even 22, what's important in life. It's not to be the richest guy. It's not to go to Wall Street and be a hot shot with Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs. It's really not about that. It's about the people around you. And I learned that the hard way with the death of my mother and my fiance when I was 24 and 26. Yeah, it was very hard, I can tell you. And then you learn what's really important in life. It's not about getting ahead. It's not about your titles. I used to tell my students, you'll all make more money than you know what to do with, you know? It's not like you want to be the richest guy on the block or gal on the block. But, I think that one of the things I'm trying to do is help people get to that wisdom you just shared much earlier in life. And if they can get there in their 30s or even their 20s or even their 40s, why wait? Because why wouldn't you let the fullness? Hubert Joly is in my book. Was just literally was the smartest guy in the room. And at McKinsey, he was known as that. He was the youngest partner ever. And, he got to the top at a young age. He said, I got to the top of the mountain. I found it was very hollow up there. There was no fulfillment, no satisfaction. And he had to said, tumble down into the valley and start over and realize. And he went off with a group of monks to try to find his heart. Now he writes a book called The Heart of Leadership. It's all about the heart. And I think more people are recognizing this, that leadership today, if you can't lead with your heart as well as your head, you can't be a good leader because no one's going to think you care about them and they're not going to follow you.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a heart moment from Bill George. And
From Bill George.
I remember seeing you at Pepperdine.
Mm-hmm.
That was some years ago, and
2007.
2007. And you told the story of your fiance and your mother.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think wrote you at the time, but and I said, when you mentioned those two things, there was a part of you that paused in the middle of your presentation because they both hit you, the power of those losses. And when you did that, Bill, the whole audience leaned towards you.
Really?
Oh, yeah, I was watching it. I was saying, I don't want it to be disingenuous, but I think what happened is when you shared that, I remember it like it was yesterday. You were sharing it like a fact. And then there was a part of you that realized, wait, this is much more than a fact.
Yeah.
And when that happened, the whole audience flexed towards you.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted to share that as a little sound time capsule. And I flexed towards you. To be honest, that's one of the reasons I've been tracking you since 2007. And I'm so glad that we finally got to have a conversation.
Thank you. I have to tell you a very honest thing I don't tell people. This happened in 1968. I always remember the date, August 11th, 1968. My wife Penny and I, this week, we'll have our 53rd wedding anniversary. But I've carried, and I still carry, and I tell Penny this, guilt about what a great relationship and marriage we've had. And I feel guilt towards my fiance who passed away and never had those opportunities. And Penny and I discover each other. I call it a God incidence. Maybe depending on your religious views or your views about things, you could say as a psychiatrist, well, you were vulnerable. Maybe so. And maybe she was vulnerable and maybe we came together. But it was meant to be. That's what I mean by the incidents. It wasn't just, okay, it's just, because we wouldn't have been together for 53 years. And so I think I've always felt some guilt that I've had such a good life and my fiance never had the chance to experience that, and so I can't change things. I'm a person of faith, but I think things, maybe this is the way they're meant to be. And I try to tell people that sometimes I didn't get that big job I wanted. Darn it. Maybe that wasn't meant to be. Maybe that wasn't the right place for you. Maybe you weren't meant to be there. So,
See, and Bill, I'm going to send you the video, but you know, you're so approachable right now in this moment. When you just shared that, it was right from your heart. It was very reminiscent of when you shared that at Pepperdine. It just came so out of your heart. It wasn't making the point, proving a concept. And it's interesting. I get 25 requests to be on this podcast a week.
Wow.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And what I say to to some of the PR people, including some of the people at Fortier, I say, look, the whole purpose of my podcast is to whet my listeners' appetite to find out about my guests and to fall in love with my guests. Is your client lovable?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
That's
just
a great question.
no, I'm just sharing it with you because
I got you.
You are likable, admirable. You're so informative. But in that little moment that you just shared it, I am telling you, I know my listeners. They admired you, they respected you. But when you just shared that moment of real vulnerability, they fell in love with you, Bill. And I think that's important. Here's something that your wife might find funny. Sometimes I've said this about my wife. I've been married 44 years. And I've even tweeted, I said, at times when you feel tolerated by your spouse, it hurts. But then when you realize how difficult you can be, it's a gift.
Yeah. Yes. So that's how we grow. And, and I need my wife to help me. She's, on one hand, she said, why are you trying to impress all those people at Davos, all those powerful people? On the other hand, when I get down, she can pick me up, I found a little note in my DOP kit because I was going to New York Monday morning. And so I get to the hotel on Monday night and I'm getting ready to go to bed. And there's a note from her saying, I know how important this week is to you because you really want to do well. So just want to know I love you and I'm there for you. That's all she had to say. It just meant a great deal that's so simple. There was nothing sophisticated about that, but just the fact she took time to do it. She didn't have to do that, and in fact, she hid it in my DOP kit, so I wouldn't see it until the evening.
You got the letter and you got the note and you thought to yourself, I didn't know I was lovable. Wow, that's good.
We have a program I went to called, they had this thing, ILAC, I am lovable and capable. And I think, let's face it, an awful lot of the world doesn't think they're lovable. You know what I mean? And they won't necessarily, so you got it. They trying to make you impressed with them. But even to your Larry King story, they don't know they're lovable, And in fact, some people put on this gruff exterior because they're afraid they've got a big open heart. They're afraid to be penetrated. Yeah. Which is sad. So I'm sure you've seen a lot more people than I have, but I've seen a fair number like that. So I wish we could help people. Part of the thing I'm trying to do with my book is help people really open up and be real. What are you afraid of? What am I really afraid of? To be vulnerable. John Hope Bryant taught me that. He said, vulnerability is power. Everyone else can see these things about you. When you think you're invulnerable and you try to put up the armor or protect yourself, they else do that.
Here's something that Penny will get maybe more than you. One of the things that people are really afraid of underneath it all is many people are afraid to be unconditionally loved.
Yes.
Because then they'd have to let go of their guard, and they've kept their guard up their whole life to cope, and it's been exhausting. And so many people are afraid to feel psychologically safe and loved because it would twist them inside out but it might heal them.
Hmm.
So where can people find out more about you and the book?
Let me comment on that for a minute. Uh, One of the great benefits I've had in my life, call it whatever you like. I knew my mother loved me unconditionally. I never was sure about my father. I think he would love me more if I were CEO of Medtronic or Honeywell or some other company. My mother, I knew she loved me unconditionally, everything she did. That's why her death was so hard for me, because I knew that she loved me unconditionally. There aren't many people in your life, they love you that way. In fact, the better you do in life, the more you are at risk of being surrounded by people. Jamie Dimon once said that when he got fired from by Sandy Weil, that hey, I realized all those people went away that thought I was so great until I got fired, and then so there are a lot of conditional people out there, and I've tried not to be that to the people. I'm mentoring a lot of people and just care about them, and I'm not looking for anything from them. Go ahead, I
Here's,
interrupt.
here's an insight into your dad. Your dad loved you unconditionally, but he was emotionally shy
Yeah. Yes.
and he was
Mm.
awkward. So he couldn't tap into that. And so what
Mm.
came out was more operational. Oh, you could be anything you want to be, but down deep, he loved you unconditionally, but he didn't know what to do with it. And it was both of your loss.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing it. This has been a great therapy session about my
Oh, there
father.
you go. So where can people find you and find out more about you?
Well, BillGeorge.org is my website. Everything's all over there, and this podcast will be as soon as I can get it up. And I would say that well beyond that, you can buy. It doesn't do any good to spend a year writing a book if no one reads it. So I hope people will read the book and get it at Amazon, Barnes and Noble stores, Porchlight Books, lots of places. But I hope people will write me and tell me what they think. Just bgeorgehbs.edu, because I love to have the dialogue. I respond to everything on LinkedIn, all comments that come in on LinkedIn, I respond to, because except the ones that there aren't many on LinkedIn. On Facebook and Twitter, there's some that kind of off the wall, and I don't respond to that 4-letter words and stuff. But no, anyone serious, I do, because I have a dialogue now, relationship with a lot of people online I've never met in person. It's almost embarrassing to say, but we have a great dialogue, a great relationship.
And to my listeners, he really means that. I mean, he's put a lot into this. He's crossing over generations. He's sharing the baton with Zach. Um, if you're a millennial, if you deal with baby boomers, if you want to close the gap between the generations, this will be a model for it, because you'll also pick up the relationship between Bill and Zach, and that might be something that's a value added that you'll pick up from the book. But thank you, Bill, and thank you to all our listeners. And when wake up calls come your way, try to wake up. Take care, everyone.